Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, a busy day yesterday, Sunday for Missouri. Michael Sam announces that he is gay, becoming the first, NFL draft prospect to ever make that announcement. Just first of all, your thoughts about how he handled the whole process.
Right. I think it was his story to tell when and how he wanted to tell it. Nobody was going to pressure him into doing it before he wanted to, or at least they shouldn't have. That should be the way that it goes with situations like this. And, in August, he told the team, he let everybody that was important to him as far as the people he sees every day at Missouri know. And I felt like he said to me last night, that should be enough. He really doesn't see why he has to. Well, he does see, but he wishes he didn't have to go on New York Times and ESPN and all that in order to tell the country that he's gay, because he doesn't think it's that big of a deal. But the way he did it and the way that his team, his publicity team and his agents and all that stuff set it up was to get maximum exposure for the story, obviously. Doing it, launching it on ESPN and New York Times at the same time on a Sunday night when everybody's watching and stuff like that. And so, it was a great way to get his story out and to, get at the forefront of this issue too, and kind of thrust him into that spotlight.
Yeah, he's right. In theory, that why should he have to? I guess, but in practice, obviously, if you're the first to do anything, there's going to be a lot of attention on that. I think probably when he first kind of decided at Mizzou to just kind of live out there and not really hide the fact he was gay, probably was leading inevitably to this point. It was just a matter of when. And from all accounts, he wasn't someone who ever really did try to hide it from his teammates. He officially told them in August, but I think many of them knew before then, which is fine. And I think probably the NFL knew about. I think most of the reporters covering the Missouri team probably knew about it by September or something like that. So the fact that the NFL, I would assume that the vast majority of them knew about it too. So I don't know that there was any great value in not coming out. And then just the matter of timing, I think he and his publicist thought that they were probably at risk of losing the chance to tell it their own way. So.
Right.
It all worked out fine. I think in the end, the reaction I thought was pretty heartening from all quarters, just pretty much universally supporting him, praising him for having the guts to do it. So I thought it worked out well. Now that's the first thing. Now the second part of it is, will the NFL see him in this? I think we all were pretty pleased that his Missouri teammates seemed to be almost universally supportive. What now, though, with the NFL draft coming up? Will somehow Michael Sam being gay be viewed as a distraction, something that an NFL team will think, we think he's about as good as player X, and player X is not going to come with, all the publicity Michael Sam is, so maybe we'll take this other guy, and on down the line to where it affects his draft status?
Well, you'd like to think the NFL would be at least as enlightened a place as Missouri, and the way that his teammates treated him and stuff like that. But I think what you say has merit. Like if an NFL GM is weighing his options in the third or fourth round and he's got Michael Sam and two or three other, similar prospects with him, he might say, right now this franchise really can't deal with a full-blown international almost media phenomenon and go to the next guy. You'd like to think that wouldn't be the case, but I can also see how that could be the case, But I guess as far as the distraction angle, I would say a very persuasive counterbalance to that, or a counter opinion to that, would be just the fact that he was out to his team this year, and Missouri had one of its best. He had one of the best seasons in Missouri history for a defender, and Missouri had one of its best seasons ever, knowing full well that one of its best players was gay. So if you're an NFL GM and you're thinking, oh, geez, how's this team going to get along with a gay player and things like that? Well, Michael Sam can kind of point to Missouri and his experience this year and say, it can be done, and I've done it before, so why would it be different at the NFL level?
And if you were a forward-thinking GM and he was a player you wanted in the first place, that's the second part of it. He wasn't going to be a first-round draft pick anyway.
Right,
he's the guy that they do have some questions about just football ability-wise. But if he's a guy you liked in the first place and you're a GM, you could also flip it and say, it would be nice to be on the right side of history here. You know, when if they one day make a movie about, you know, this topic, I could be the Branch Rickey. You know, I could be seen as the guy that wasn't stuck in the dark ages, and you know, that could be a positive too. I mean, we'll see. I don't know that. I don't want to make it seem like, boy, if he goes beyond the third round, this is the only reason why, because there could be, you know, he's transitioning to a different position. There is probably some legitimate concerns that he got 9 of his 11.5 sacks in 3 games against kind of, I think, right tackles who were probably a little bit overmatched. And in the other 11 games, he had 2.5 sacks. I mean, that's a legitimate question because the people he's going to be facing in the NFL are going to be a lot more like the guys he was facing in those other 11 games.
Yeah, and the fact that, you know, his first tryout at outside linebacker, which people were anxious to see at the Senior Bowl, didn't really go as planned. You know, he kind of looked wooden in pass defense and just kind of not quick enough at that position too. So I mean, there are questions about where he fits in at the next level, and like you said, I mean, if he does slip down draft boards, it's going to be tempting to say, well, this is because he said he was gay, but it could be just because teams aren't liking what they see out of him, you know, on film and in drills. But then there's also a lot of story to be written as far as he's still going to the combine, he's still got individual workouts and stuff like that. So I mean, it's a long way off.
If he drops all the way off out of the draft, though, then I think you've got your answer. This is how progressive the NFL really is. Yeah. There is no smooth segue here, so we're going to go into our second topic of the day, which is football recruiting. Missouri signs a class last Wednesday that I think most of the analysts peg them in the 30s nationally, which is about where they usually are. They, I think, were picked between 10th and 13th in the SEC by most of the analysts. So by those measures, it wasn't fantastic, it was just sort of the usual Missouri recruiting class. But as Gary Pinkel pointed out, the usual Missouri recruiting classes tend to finish in the standings or in the polls higher than you would think. Right. So just your thoughts on maybe some of the big storylines that emerged from this year's recruiting class.
Well, I think the biggest thing that has the most ramifications for the near future is just how quickly they've been able to make inroads in places like Georgia and Florida, and how they were able to go up against some of the blue blood programs in those states and still get guys. I mean, with Nate Brown and Tavon Ross in Georgia, Georgia made severe pushes for them after they had already been committed to Missouri for a while, and they rebuked those offers. In Florida, I always mispronounce his name, Roxell McWilliams, the defensive end, and also Marvin Zanders, the quarterback, the early enrollee, got late pushes from Florida and ended up sticking with Missouri too. So I mean, it's only their second year really of focusing on those 2 areas, and they're already making pretty good inroads with some of the middle to high 3-star guys and low 4-star guys. I mean, Florida in particular, they had 7 signees from Florida this year. That's as many as they had combined from 2002 to 2013. So that's an explosion of talent from a state that's talent rich. And I mean, so that's got to be a heartening sign for the future.
Now, conversely, only got 2 guys out of Texas, I believe. Yeah. Didn't knock anybody's socks off in the state of Missouri. There were some players they wanted and did not get out of Missouri, and both over in the Kansas City side and the St. Louis side. Do you think in any way they've sort of gone from, you know, we were in Texas and we got the guys out of Texas that Texas maybe didn't want, or Texas A&M initially didn't want, and now we're going to Florida and getting the ones that Georgia initially didn't want, or Florida State didn't initially want? Is it sort of, you think it's basically 6 of one, half dozen of the other, or do you think maybe they're getting a higher caliber player on one side or the other?
I don't know. I guess we're going to have to see, because I mean, they got so much, you know, mileage out of getting those low-star guys from Texas that ended up being All-Americans and great players for them. And we really
Michael Sam for one.
Yeah, Michael Sam for one. But we really haven't had a whole 4 or 5 years to see whether these Florida and Georgia guys are going to be as good at the collegiate level. But I mean, it seems as if, even though Pinkel said they're going to stay in Texas and they're still going to beat the Bush around in Dallas and stuff like that, it seems as if they're really focusing more of their efforts towards the Southeast now, not only in Florida and Georgia, but in Tennessee too, and really getting into the Southeastern states. And like you said, the 2 guys they got from Texas this year were, you know, fitting in with the Sean Witherspoon, Denario Alexander, Michael Sam mode, and that they were 2-star guys and stuff like that. But yeah, they just didn't have quite as much representation from there as they usually have.
Yeah, I think going forward, the big thing for Missouri will continue to be, can you maybe be the first to see the talent in a kid who maybe didn't have a super productive junior year, make the first offer, and then there's a little bit of a loyalty bond there with those kids, which I think was what did happen with the two big-time Georgia kids. So I think, I don't know, I kind of walk away from that from so much of recruiting is based on what happened the 2 seasons before,
right,
coming off a 5-7 season where everybody was predicting the end of the world. I mean, it wasn't just like Missouri is not a very good football team. It was like their coach might not be around when you sign. To sign a pretty respectable class under those circumstances, I think was pretty positive, and I think they'll probably have a better shot at getting in on higher profile kids this year, coming off 12-2, and with Gary Pinkel's job security, no question.
Right.
Lastly, this kind of just banter about with our faux Mel Kiper, Todd McShay hats on about who we think might be able to make a quick impact for Missouri out of this group.
Well, we mentioned Nate Brown earlier, and I think he's a good candidate both because, one, he's a pretty polished prospect. He played in a spread system in high school and put up huge numbers in it, and two, the Missouri wide receiving core is kind of thin next year. You know, you've got Dorial Green-Beckham, Bud Sasser, Jimmy Hunt, and then a whole bunch of question marks beyond that. And for a team that likes to spread the ball around, you're going to need people to step into that role. So Nate Brown could be one. A guy or somebody in the secondary is going to need to come in quick too. And so, I mean, I think they have 7 signees that could play in the secondary. A guy like Logan Cheadle, who's an early enrollee, who's already pretty far along in both his pass coverage and his run stopping skills, and he's going to be able to go through spring ball too. He's somebody that could step into that cornerback rotation where they lose both of their starters. So, I mean, there's one for both sides of the ball, and those guys I think could get an early look.
I think another spot where they could really use some help is safety. You mentioned defensive back, but safety specifically. And Tavon Ross was a kid, just watching his highlight clips, very smooth athlete, a guy who not only can intercept passes, but take them the distance. I think he's a kid that could come in and probably play pretty quickly at a position of need. I was kind of impressed with a few others. I thought Brandon Lee, the linebacker out of Indianapolis, looks like he's a guy that might be able to fit in the mold of someone who maybe their first year can play special teams and then jump in and contribute more on defense after that. I was kind of intrigued by Ish Witter, the running back from Florida. He looked very elusive and kind of fit the mold of the smaller Missouri running backs that seem to fare pretty well in this system. Thought he was another guy. And then I will once again struggle with the same name you did, but Roxell. I liked him as a defensive end. He looked like he's a guy that could get to the quarterback. And, you know, they do have Shane Ray back, and they do have, help me out here, Marcus Golden back, who are both highly productive players, but they will need some more depth at defensive end too. So, and that is a position I think that if you're fairly physically well-developed as a high school kid, you could potentially play as a, you know, if nothing else, as kind of a pass rushing specialist.
And here's how I try to remember it. It's like Roxette and Excel, like the spreadsheets. You put them together, and you get
two of my favorite things that were born in the 1980s combined into one. And he was probably born in the 1980s, so. Well, probably. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this mashup of a football webcast, and join us again on the eve of spring football when we will look forward to that.